truck ride with Elijah, the driver, over here, and we were headed to go do some kayaking, buy a used kayak from a guy who run the Pigeon River today. We got out of church, and so I thought I'd do this en route so I could get it off to you so you have it for the greater part of the day. I just want to remind you that we're supposed to be reading this and also prayerfully asking God to reveal himself to us. So let's just pray with you right now. Me at this time period, you the next time period, but God hears our prayers. So Father, we ask that you'll help John and I to glean the truth that you have revealed in your word, that you'll apply it to our hearts and lives, that you would make us fertile soil for the seed you're planting. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So we're in John chapter 1 still, and we're going to read, I know that you read through the end of the passage, and we'll read 14 to 18. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified about him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, he comes after me and has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me. For his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, and grace and truth was realized through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God at any time, but the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained it." So there's three things that I want to kind of comment on, and they're all contained in verse 14, though they wrap on through the others. And, well, maybe there's four, but the one word is dwelt, the other word I had texted you about, which is begotten, and the third word is about glory, and I guess the fourth word would be grace. Maybe the fifth word is truth. There's a lot there, but let's just look at 14. We know that the word begotten is a little confusing. It sounds like gave birth to, but the actual word in the original text is monogenes, which means of the one and only kind, the one and only. And so, in talking about Jesus as the one and only Son of God, he is God all in one substance, but he is the personhood of the Son, yet the personhood of the Son is one with the Father and not separate. And that's the nature of the Trinity. That's what we could probably talk about that for a long period of time. But it does not imply that Jesus at some point came into existence, and that's why the study of 1 through 18 ends up being the foundation of a lot of the church's study of who Jesus is and his deity, which is called the Christology, because it's very important to understand that Jesus was always God. He's always part of the Trinity, always existence in that cohesive unit of Godness. He never came into existence. There's never been a time that he did not exist. There's always been the three persons in the one God. And so in that, the beginning of this, what we read earlier, is that the Word was one with God, was at the beginning, so it was part of the creative presence of God in creation. And so we had this highlight of the creation story in the Old Testament of Genesis, but also in Genesis, and then we see the story of where Abraham's called out of Ur, and the people of God, the Israelites, are originating there. And so when we read that text, it reminds us of a lot of different things. And then they go into slavery, and then Moses is called to call them out of Egypt. And then when the people leave Egypt and come into a relationship with God, God gives a law code to emphasize his holiness and this separation that's occurred ever since creation. So the creation story tells us that man was tempted, drawn away of his own desire, and rebelled against God. And he sinned against God. Adam and Eve started that. And then there's this separation from God and man that we cannot overcome. That there's a kicking out of the garden, and then there's a death angel that says the way to God now, there's a price to be paid. There's death to come back into that place where God used to walk with man. That's no more because of the sin that entered into the world. And so God forms this relationship with Abraham and his seed, and says that all the world will be blessed through his seed, and eventually that ends up being Jesus. And so as they go through the story, Moses then becomes the leader that God uses to bring the people out of slavery and into the promised land, into the land of promise. So vehicle of that is as a law that God gives that defines God's holiness and man's lack of being that holy, but gives man a way to approach God. But within that story of the people of Israel in the wilderness, relying on a law and having a place that they built in the middle that God designed, this place in the middle was called the tabernacle. And they built this tabernacle, a tent structure, which is like the temple, but it was just a tented structure. It sat in the middle of the camp. And so of the 12 tribes were encamped in sections around it, except the tribe of Levi actually was close to it because they actually were the priests. And that was where the presence of God would dwell. And if you can remember the stories of the Old Testament of Moses and the people of Israel in the wilderness, you'll remember that they were led by a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. But when they stopped, that presence of God then rested over this tabernacle place, and that's where God dwelled among his people. And so when we read this passage now, we need to remember the story of the people of Israel, what God had done, the way that God made it possible for his presence to be among the people but separate from them. And that separation was within the tabernacle, and that separation was with a mediator, because Moses had to talk to the people for God, and God to Moses for the people, and there was a go-between. And that go-between separation area was what they were living within as they moved into the intertestamental period between that and the New Testament. So John's telling us now that this Creator God that they know through the law and Moses, he is also the Word, and this Word has become actual flesh and blood. So fully God and fully man, Jesus has come. He's condescended into the world, and in this world where he walks, he has made a place where man and God can come close together in relationship again, both by his physical presence and by the fact that he is going to atone for the sins of man and make it possible for men to, if they believe in his name, become children of God. Not by birth. Remember that. That's what he stressed in the last section. We aren't born into this family of God, but that we are given the opportunity, if we believe on the name of Jesus, to become new creatures, to become a new family that are in God. So that's pretty cool. The other thing we see is that the author references that we see the glory of God in a way that we've not seen it before. Because before, when the glory dwelled in the temple or dwelled in another place, in this case, they actually beheld God's glory. That same Shekinah glory, they call it, the glory of God, was in the life of Jesus, and they observed the glory of God in this flesh form of the Word. So that's the glory, and that's what dwelt means. So with this word dwelt, when it says he was made flesh, he dwelt among us, that word dwelt is actually tabernacled among us. That God came and pitched his tent right here in the middle of us. I mean, that's what his flesh was. His flesh was a tent. And he came and he pitched his tent, dwelt, tabernacled among men. So that's just resonates to what the Old Testament was saying about God being among his people, they would dwell among us. So that's why the name's so significant. Emmanuel, God with us, God tabernacling among his people. That's the Word made flesh. The other thing that we had talked about, I texted you about, was begotten. The word begotten is a tricky word because it means the one and only kind, the Son of God. And so the Son of God is basically one and only in relationship to God. Another place in the Old Testament that we see that used is when Abraham had to offer up his son Isaac on an altar, or was asked to, but he didn't actually do that, but he was obedient to do whatever God asked him to do. In that case, it says, give your only begotten son Isaac, or your begotten son Isaac. And so that sounds of it, that was the only son of Abraham, but it's not true. Ishmael was actually older, the firstborn, by a handservant, so that wasn't his only son. But it was the one and only in relationship son to Abraham. So when we read that in this text, it is talking about the begotten Son of God, who's one in relationship, who actually is one in his bosom, or next to the heart of God. These three persons all in one substance, and that's what we understand it to be. So Jesus never came into existence. He's always been, and he always will be. The Word was always there from beginning to now. The last thing that I would stress is that the law came through Moses, a set of rules to approach God, but grace and truth came through Jesus. And so one thing that's really important to understand is that the truth that Jesus brought us is the real heart of God's message to us, what he really wants from us. And it says in Hosea, I don't want your sacrifices, I want your love. I don't want you to offer burnt offerings, I want you to know me. And so it's never about the acts, it's about a heart that gets to know God. And so that's the big thing that Jesus brought to us, is this truth about the message of God and how to know him and have a knowledge of him. The other, which is a big word that we hear a lot, is grace. And grace is God allotting to us something we just flat out don't deserve. And grace is God being so big to us while we were his enemies, like we were opposed to him. They were the people of darkness that oppose and want to overcome the light, that wouldn't acknowledge it. And yet God, even when we're in that place, brings us this message of love and grace and truth in Jesus. But it's only available, and it's only given to those who believe on his name. I think that's so cool. And the other fact that we're going to get into the next week is talking about what it looks like for John the Baptist to witness about Jesus and to point to him. So in this next section, and we'll talk about the rest of the chapter next week, we're going to place emphasis on what is Jesus saying about God, the God who pre-existed. What is John the Baptist saying about God, the God who pre-existed? Remember again, this isn't John who wrote the book. This is John the Baptist in the story of the Gospel of John. Man, I hope you have a great afternoon. Send me some questions.